November 11th, 1880. Dawn. 5,000 people choked the streets outside the old Melbourne jail. They crushed against the barriers. The air smelled of sweat and anticipation. Some held tight to paper tickets. These were not for a show. They were invitations to an execution. Who was worth this frenzy? A king? No. It was a 25-year-old outlaw. Inside the walls, the noise faded. A man sat in the dark. Heavy leg irons cut into his skin. He checked the weight of the chains. This was Edward Ned Kelly. The police feared him. The selectors worshipped him. At first glance, a convicted murderer, but in reality, the spark of a civil war. 60 minutes remained. The rope hung still. The crimes that split a nation were about to be paid for in blood. December 1854. In the dusty settlement of Beveridge, Victoria, a child entered the world. Ned Kelly, at first glance, a future outlaw, but in reality, a boy capable of heroism. Why did he turn to violence? The answer lies in the mud of a local creek. A child was drowning. Ned didn't hesitate. He dove into the water and pulled the boy to safety. For this act, he received a green silk sash. He kept it for years. He wore it under his armor on the day of his death, but a sash could not feed a family. His father, John Red Kelly, drank to forget his poverty. The smell of cheap whiskey filled the small house. His mother, Ellen Quinn, struggled to find bread for 8 hungry children. The police watched them constantly. They were like wolves circling a wounded animal. The family packed their bags. They moved from town to town. But the trouble followed. It wasn't just bad luck. It was a targeted campaign. John Red Kelly stole a single calf. He needed to feed his kin. The court showed no mercy. 6 months of hard labor. The work broke him. He could not pay the fine. Then came the uncle, convicted of arson. The sentence was death. Later, the judge reduced it to hard labor and chains. Ned watched these events. He learned early that the law was a weapon used against the poor. Events accelerated. At 14 years old, childhood ended. Ned met Harry Power, a veteran bushranger, a mentor in crime. Power put a gun in the boy's hands. He taught him to read the bush and evade patrols. April 1870. Together, they terrorized northeastern Victoria. They stopped coaches on the dirt roads. They demanded cash and gold. Ned was no longer an observer. He was an active participant. But inexperienced criminals make mistakes. Ned targeted a Chinese pig dealer. He demanded 10 shillings. The dealer did not surrender. He grabbed a heavy stick. He beat the young robber in the street. Police arrived. Handcuffs clicked shut. The court records show 2 robbery charges were dismissed due to lack of evidence. The system let him go. But the police marked his file. There was no turning back. Another arrest followed soon after. The charge involved a stolen horse. This time, the interaction turned bloody. A constable confronted Ned. He did not use handcuffs immediately. He used the butt of his revolver. He struck Ned's head repeatedly. The sound of metal on bone cracked through the air. The doctor's report is dry but brutal. The boy's skull was a mass of raw, bleeding flesh. It took 9 stitches to close the wound. The pain seared a lesson into his brain. The law was not a protector. It was the enemy. 9 stitches. That was the physical cost of the brawl. The flesh was raw and bleeding, but the psychological cost was far higher. The police had declared open war on Kelly, and Kelly promised to return the favor tenfold. April 1878, Constable Alexander Fitzpatrick rode to the Kelly homestead. His orders were simple: arrest Ned's younger brother Dan for horse theft. He arrived alone. He left broken. What exactly happened inside those walls remains disputed. The police report describes a sudden ambush. Ned kicked open the door. He raised his revolver and fired. The bullet missed Fitzpatrick's head but shattered his wrist. Then, chaos. Ellen Kelly grabbed a heavy shovel. She swung it with full force and cracked the officer's skull. But the Kelly family told a completely different story. They claimed Fitzpatrick cornered 14-year-old Kate. He made inappropriate sexual advances. In their version, Ned wasn't a criminal. He was a brother defending his sister's honor. Who was telling the truth? The court didn't care. Ellen Kelly received a sentence of 3 brutal years in prison. Her crime was aiding attempted murder. Ned and Dan didn't wait for the handcuffs. They vanished into the bush. They were joined by two loyal friends, Joe Byrne and Steve Hart. The footage of the landscape shows unforgiving terrain, dense scrub, jagged rocks, and endless silence. They weren't just running. They were planning an act that would shock the colony to its core. October 26, 1878, Stringy Bark Creek. 4 police officers set up camp in the dense Victorian bushland. Sergeant Michael Kennedy and Constables Thomas Lonigan, Michael Scanlon, and Thomas McIntyre. They were hunting the Kelly gang. They had no idea death was stalking them through the trees. At first glance, a routine patrol, but in reality, a death trap. 5 o'clock in the afternoon, shadows lengthened. The air smelled of damp earth and tension. Suddenly, the Kelly gang rushed the camp. They moved like phantoms materializing from the shade. Lonigan reacted on instinct. He reached for his weapon. It was too late. Ned shot him dead instantly. McIntyre froze. He saw the gun barrels. He raised his hands and stared down the muzzle. Total surrender. It got worse. Kennedy and Scanlon returned from hunting. They walked straight into the kill zone. The gang ambushed them without mercy. Scanlon refused to surrender. He tried to fight. Ned cut him down with a volley of bullets. Kennedy was the last man standing. He tried raising his hands. He signaled for surrender, but the gang kept firing. Ned stepped forward with his shotgun. At close range, he blasted Kennedy through the chest. The aftermath was gruesome. When authorities recovered the bodies, the damage was clear. Lonigan had 3 bullet wounds, including 1 through his right eye. Scanlon had 4 bullets in him. Kennedy had at least 2 fatal shots. The corpses lay on the ground, looted of all valuables. 3 police officers slaughtered in cold blood. The colony erupted in outrage. Fear spread through the towns. The government declared the Kelly gang officially outlawed. This was a specific legal term. It meant they could be killed on sight without consequence. Massive rewards were posted for their capture. The police expected them to flee. They expected them to hide like cornered animals. But Ned and his gang didn't hide. They went on the offense. December 1878. That was when the offensive began. The gang rode into Euroa with military precision. They didn't just rob the town. They seized the police substation, took hostages at a local homestead, and severed the communication lines. Wire cutters snapped the telegraph cables. The town was completely isolated from the outside world. Silence fell over the streets. Then, the gang walked straight into the National Bank. They emptied every safe and cleared every cash drawer. The result was staggering. They escaped with over $2,000 in gold and currency. The authorities were humiliated, but the gang needed money again. February 10, 1880. The target was Gerald Derry. This time, they didn't just avoid the police, they hunted them. The gang stormed the police barracks and locked the officers inside their own cells. Then came the ultimate insult. Ned Kelly dressed in a stolen police uniform. Witnesses watched as he strolled through the main street in broad daylight, unnoticed and unchallenged. While the town attended church, the gang moved next door. They held the hotel staff hostage. They raided the bank for another $2,141 in cash and valuables. But Ned didn't stop at theft. He found the mortgage papers and loan documents. He gathered them in a pile and struck a match. The paper turned to ash. He declared that the bloody banks were crushing the life's blood out of the poor. Why did the public cheer for criminals? It seemed like lawlessness, but for the struggling farmers, it was justice. At first glance, a violent gang, but in reality, a symbol of resistance. The Kelly gang had become folk heroes to the working class. They were seen as anti-establishment warriors fighting corrupt colonial oppression. But to the government and police, the picture was different. To them, these were cold-blooded murderers who needed to be stopped by any means necessary. Ned knew they were marked for death. Conventional tactics would not save them. So he devised something unprecedented in criminal history. The gang gathered moldboards, the thick iron pieces from farmers' plows. They heated the metal and beat it into shape. They forged bulletproof armor. Each suit weighed over 90 pounds. A breastplate, a back guard, shoulder plates, an apron, a helmet. The iron was 6 millimeters thick. The helmets resembled tin cans with narrow eye slits. Ned wore the prototype suit, featuring shoulder plates unique to his design. The testing process was brutal. The gang strapped the armor to a tree and fired at close range. The metal held. You could still see the reverse bullet dent on Ned's breastplate years later. These suits could withstand direct gunfire. They turned the outlaws into nightmarish walking tanks. June 26, 1880. The final phase began. Gang member Joe Byrne tracked down police informant Aaron Sherritt. A shotgun blast tore through the night. The shot hit Sherritt in the throat and chest. He died instantly. But this murder was only the bait. The gang knew the police response would be predictable. Reinforcements would rush to the area by train. Ned's plan was catastrophic. Derail the train, slaughter the survivors, burn down the police barracks, unleash total chaos. Events accelerated. They gathered at the Glenrowan railway station. They strapped on the heavy iron plates. Even their pack horses wore bullet-resistant plating. Ned paid laborers to damage the track, creating a death trap for the incoming locomotive. But there was a variable they didn't predict. A school teacher spotted the danger. He managed to alert the approaching police train before it hit the broken rails. Instead of a derailment, the train stopped safely. The element of surprise vanished. Ned faced a direct confrontation. The siege at Glenrowan began, June 28, 1880. The plan for a train derailment had failed, and now Ned faced a wall of lead. The siege at the Glenrowan Inn did not just begin. It exploded. Police carbines hammered the wooden structure from all sides. Glass shattered. Splinters flew like shrapnel. Ned took hits immediately. A bullet pierced his left arm. Another struck his foot. A third smashed into his hand. Inside the building, chaos reigned. 2 hostages fell dead in the crossfire. Joe Byrne took a police bullet to the chest and died on the floor. Bleeding and exhausted, Ned didn't surrender. He staggered out the back door and disappeared into the bush while the police cordon tightened around the burning inn. The night passed in a standoff. Then came the dawn. What emerged from the morning mist? The hardened police officers couldn't trust their eyes. An eyewitness reported a nightmare. With steam rising from the ground, the figure looked like a headless ghost with a thick iron neck. It was the most extraordinary sight of the century. The Iron Devil had returned. Ned Kelly was not hiding, he was hunting. Encased in 90 pounds of plowshare steel, he attacked the police line from their rear flank. He advanced, firing 3 handguns in a steady rhythm. For 30 minutes, he waged a one-man war. The footage of history describes the sound, the heavy clanking of armor and the sharp crack of revolvers. He staggered under the crushing weight of the metal suits, but he did not stop. Police bullets struck his chest plate. They bounced off his helmet. The armor was impenetrable. But the officers found a weakness. The head and torso were tanks. The legs were exposed. They lowered their rifles. 2 shotgun blasts tore through Ned's unprotected thighs and knees. The Iron Devil crashed to the earth. The metal clattered against the hard ground. The battle for the inn ended in fire. Police stormed the building and set it ablaze. Flames consumed the wooden frame. Later, the search teams found the charred remains of Dan Kelly and Steve Hart. The forensic question remains, did they shoot themselves or did they burn alive? There is no answer. Ned Kelly was the sole survivor. Now he faced a different kind of noose. October 19, 1880, Melbourne. Ned stood trial for the murder of police constables. The evidence was overwhelming. The verdict, guilty. The sentence, death by hanging. Judge Sir Redmond Barry looked down from the bench. He delivered the final formula. May God have mercy on your soul. Ned's response was immediate. It was chilling. He stared at the judge and said, I will go a little further than that and say I will see you there where I go. At first glance, a prisoner's threat, but in reality, a prophecy. 12 days later, Judge Barry was dead. The public rallied. A petition with 32,000 signatures begged for a reprieve. Crowds gathered outside the prison walls, demanding mercy, but the authorities were deaf. On November 3rd, they scheduled the execution. 8 days remained. The day before the hanging, the camera records a final act of defiance. Ned sat for a portrait. He wanted a keepsake for his family. His mother, Ellen, was still a prisoner in the same complex. She visited him one last time. She did not weep. She gave a final command: "Die like a Kelly." November 11th, 1880. The story cut off here. 9 o'clock in the morning. The countdown began. Guards entered the cell and unlocked the heavy padlock. They removed Ned's leg irons. The metal clattered against the stone floor. He was free to walk, but only to his death. A chaplain joined the procession. They moved through the damp corridors and past the prison garden. Ned stopped. He looked at the flowers. He remarked on their beauty. It was the last living color he would ever see. Outside the walls, the scene resembled a carnival. 5,000 people pushed against the gates. Some waved tickets purchased for a front row view. The noise was deafening. Even children were present in the crush. Why did they bring children? It looked like entertainment. But this was a state-sanctioned killing. Inside the execution chamber, the air was stale. A heavy wooden beam supported the noose. The sheriff, the sub-sheriff, and the doctor stood near the mechanism. They waited in silence. Witnesses packed the corridors below, craning their necks to see the platform. At first glance, a simple room. But in reality, a theater of death. 10 o'clock struck. The executioner stepped forward. He was a man of 60 years. He wore no mask. He had no shame. He grabbed Ned's arms and strapped them tight at the elbows. Movement was impossible. A priest stood close, clutching a large brass cross. The executioner reached up. He threw the rope over the beam. He adjusted the loop around Ned's neck. The rough hemp bit into the skin. Then came the final moment. Historians still argue about the last breath. Some records claim he muttered 3 famous words: "Such is life." Others report a resigned sigh: "Ah, well, I suppose it has come to this." One account suggests he prepared a speech, but his voice failed him. He remained silent. 10 o'clock and 5 minutes. The lever was pulled. The trapdoor gave way with a loud crash. Edward Ned Kelly plunged through the floor. It was an 8-foot drop. The physics were brutal. His neck snapped instantly. There was no struggle. The officials checked the body. They removed the white hood. The face was shockingly calm. There was no discoloration, no grimace of pain. Only a thin red rope mark remained under his left ear. 30 minutes passed. They lowered the corpse into a hospital cart. The wheels rattled as they rolled him to the dead house. Australia's most infamous outlaw was gone. The file was closed. But death was not the end. It was merely a pause. A new macabre journey began. It would span over a century. 2 hours. That was all the time that passed between the execution and the arrival of the waxworks proprietor. Maximilian Kreitmeyer did not wait. He shaved Ned's head. He scraped away the famous beard. Then, he plastered the dead man's face to create a death mask. The object captured a chilling detail. The footage shows the eyes are wide open and bright. The expression is not twisted in agony, but eerily peaceful. There is no sign of suffering on the plaster cast. The guards then buried the body in the prison yard of Old Melbourne Jail. 49 years passed. In 1929, authorities closed the facility. They ordered the graves relocated, but the excavation turned into a public horror show. A steam shovel struck the wood of Kelly's coffin. The lid shattered. Bones tumbled into the dirt. The scene descended into madness. Crowds swarmed the pit from every direction. Men and children grabbed ribs and vertebrae as grotesque souvenirs. It was a looting frenzy. Foreman Lee saw the prize. He lunged into the mob and seized the skull before it disappeared into a thief's pocket. Why did they steal the bones? It seemed like simple curiosity. But the obsession with the outlaw ran deeper than respect for the dead. The Victorian premier pleaded for order. He demanded citizens return the stolen remains. Few listened. The skull never returned to the earth. Instead, it sat on a detective's desk like a macabre trophy. In 1931, it was donated to the Australian Institute of Anatomy in Canberra. It remained on and off display for 40 years. Then, security failed. In 1978, someone stole the skull from Old Melbourne Jail. It vanished for over 3 decades. Events accelerated in 2009. A farmer from West Australia stepped forward. He handed over a skull, claiming it was Kelly's. But forensic science is ruthless. Testing in 2011 revealed the deception. The skull was a fake. It likely belonged to Frederick Deeming, a serial killer hanged in 1892. However, the search for the body yielded results. Archaeologists excavated the former Pentridge prison site. They found a skeleton. The science confirmed it. DNA analysis matched. The bones bore the specific damage of bullet wounds from the Glenrowan siege. They had the body, but the real skull remains missing to this day. At first glance, a funeral, but in reality, a tactical operation. In 2012, the government released the remains. On January 20th, 2013, the family gathered. 132 years after the execution, Ned's bones were lowered into consecrated ground at Greta Cemetery. They placed him near his mother's unmarked grave. The camera records workmen pouring wet concrete over the coffin. The grave was encased in solid cement. This ensured no souvenir hunter would ever disturb him again. Ned Kelly remains a fracture in history. To some, he was a hero fighting corrupt colonial oppression. To others, a vicious murderer who killed 3 policemen in cold blood. But his story transcended the crimes. The phrase, "as game as Ned Kelly," entered the language. It became proof that the outlaw was embedded in the national consciousness. Sidney Nolan painted him. Films mythologized him. The iron armor became a symbol of identity. Thus, the legend eclipsed the man. The story proves a hard truth. History's most notorious outlaws often become legends, feared and celebrated in equal measure. If you want more shocks from the darkest archives, subscribe to The Veil History right now. We uncover the brutal executions and the secrets history tried to bury. Do not miss the next briefing. Hit that bell icon and join the Veil History community today. Thanks for watching.